Thanks to Bespoke Post for sponsoring this video. New subscribers get 20% off their first box. Go to bspk.me/wisecrack and enter code Wisecrack at checkout. What's up, guys? Michael here with another book versus film. Well, in this case, it's long-running serialized comic versus adult animation, but you get the drift. Anyway, today we're making your dreams come true. That's right, we're finally looking at Invincible. As you'd expect when a series that ran for 144 issues over 15 years got adapted for the small screen, they had to make some changes here and there. But the most interesting one has everything to do with attitude.
Tell you what. When you grow up, Air Robot, you can tell me how to swing mine.
We'll explain in this book versus film on Invincible. And spoilers ahead for the first season of Invincible and a few thousand relevant panels from the comics. But before we get into it, I wanted to give a shout out to this video's sponsor, Bespoke Post. Now, if there's one thing I like, besides edgy superhero animation, it's gear. Whether it's for cooking, hiking, camping, or just hanging out, I love researching and buying new gear that goes with those activities. So I was psyched to learn about Bespoke Post, a monthly subscription service that sends you a new box of curated goods from under-the-radar brands. Every month, they introduce members to products ranging from outdoor gear to barware to kitchen goods, even live oysters, all based on the results of a preference quiz you fill out. There is no cost to join, and you can skip a month anytime. And if for some reason you're not feeling the box you get, you can always swap it out for another one. Let's check out some of the current boxes. So right here we have their field box. Now this includes a slingshot that actually shoots seed balls. So you can shoot flower plants around the yard. This is a very nice garden balm, which can help make your hands smell really nice and feel good after working outside. And finally, we got a really nice saw knife right here. So I'm kind of the food guy for my friends, so I would actually be excited to use that knife to prepare food by the campfire if we're all outside. Let's check out what's in the other box. Okay, so right here we have the Terra box. It has a really cool, this is like a garden tool knife that can sort of saw, it can slice, you can dig with this, and at the end of a long day, you could open a cold beverage with the little attachment right there. We have, a grooming scrub bar, so you can clean up after working outside. And then we have a bird collar, so you can make friends with local birds. This is all stuff that's gonna make spending time outside this summer a lot more fun and a lot more functional. So to get 20% off your first box, go to bspk.me/wisecrack or click the link in the description and enter code Wisecrack at checkout. And now, back to the show. Now, let's start with similarities, and there are lots. Overall, the show is pretty faithful to the comic. Invincible is still the protagonist. He still pals around with the teen team, and Omni-Man is still an Omni-Dick. The narrative centering around the murder of the Guardians of the Globe is straight out of the comics too. Where the show does differ is when it changes up the order, running certain storylines parallel instead of one by one in a linear fashion. And that brings us to the first big difference, the narrative rearrangement of standout events from throughout the comics. By moving various plot threads to earlier in the narrative, the show manages to deeply explore a central theme that's more hinted at for much of the comic: moral ambiguity. See, while it's the core of Invincible's first season, Omni-Man's murder of the Guardians doesn't happen in the comics until much later, which is kind of crazy considering that the Omni-Man reveal is arguably the greatest heel turn since Hulk Hogan joined the NWO.
You can call this the New World Order of Wrestling, brother.
This allows the show to quickly establish a status quo, i.e. Omni-Man is like Superman but with a mustache, and then even more quickly subvert it, i.e. Mustache Superman is a psycho murderer, all in the course of the first episode. And while here, Omni-Man's turn to the dark side isn't as shocking as it is in the comic, it's more effective at quickly establishing the moral ambiguity of its central character. That's because here, Omni-Man's literally defined by these murders. It's in the subtext of every scene he's in for the whole season. The show asks us to consider the juxtaposition between nice husband and good dad and super murderer anytime he's on the screen. It asks us to speculate more on his motivations and ask important moral questions. Did he have true agency in his actions? Could the murder somehow be justified? Could I make that mustache work? In contrast, in the comics, we spend a long time getting to know him primarily as a family man who just happens to be a superhero, not mass murdery guy with ill intentions. He's more like a seemingly normal, albeit superpowered dude. And so when he turns, it feels like more of a major plot twist and character reveal rather than a thematic commentary. And this theme of moral ambiguity arguably explains all of the narrative reshuffling the show engages in. All of the major subplots in the show, remember, are actually drawn from disparate points in the comics timeline. And they generally all feature either one, people we perceive as good doing bad things, like when Nice Guy Robot collabs with the very bad Mauler twins to get himself a cool new bod, or two, people we perceive as bad doing good things, like when evil-seeming Titan shows a deep love and care for his family. And these aren't the only examples. There's Alan the Alien, who seems like a villain but turns out to be super chill.
Are you using your timeout?
Or Nick Fury stand-in Cecil joining up with the villainous D.A. Sinclair. Each of these plot elements in their own ways highlight the central theme of moral ambiguity. However, having them all happen concurrently lets them reflect each other, offering different perspectives on the central theme.
I just want to know why every one of the Guardians risked their necks for you.
Ultimately, this strategy builds a rich thematic cohesion. This changes our context for the climactic Omni-Man Invincible fight, in which the moral ambiguity we've been feeling is reflected in Invincible's emotional conflict. He's torn between his love for his father and doing what he feels is right. Now, this scene appears in both the comics and the show, but in the comic, it forms the first initial statement on the theme of moral ambiguity, which will go on to be explored throughout the run. On the show, however, it becomes a cohesive statement in and of itself, the final encapsulation of a season-long theme. Let's face it, a super fight with your dad kind of makes you feel stuff. I bet I could kick my dad's ass. So by building up to that over a longer time and using the thematic cohesion from reshuffled plot threads, the show mines the emotional and thematic potential of the event more fully.
And what if they resist?
That's why we're here, to keep them from resisting.
But lest you think we're getting soft, let's get into the nasty, bloody violent stuff with difference number 2. The show depicts the physical effects of violence in much more detail than the comics. Yeah, we are absolutely not exaggerating. So much animated blood, much of which is not super YouTube friendly, so please bear with our careful censoring. To say Invincible is a gory show would be like saying Elon Musk has a little bit too much money. The comic is gory too, so it's not like this is a massive aesthetic shift, but there's definitely a difference. Namely, the show is willing to go a lot farther in its depiction of inside body parts on the outside. Now it's dripping with blood and guts straight from the jump. Obviously, the fight between Omni-Man and the Guardians of the Globe at the end of the first episode is, to use an academic term, gnarly. And the show doesn't let up. It's chock full of moments where we see the full ramifications of super heroic punch-ups, like the Flaxen invasions, where bystanders get caught in the chaos and spout thick red life juice everywhere. This all leads to the truly horrific fight between Omni-Man and Invincible, which spares absolutely no detail in showing us exactly what would happen if two truly supermen squared off. Also, it made me horrified to ride the train ever again. In contrast, the comic doesn't show any gore until Omni-Man murders the Guardians much later, and then it waits a long time before showing it again in the fight between Omni-Man and Invincible. So whereas the comic depicts all the guts and stuff in very specific scenes, the show engages in what I'm coining right now as squishy consistency. Yuck. But things get really interesting when we directly compare how certain scenes played out in the comic book with their animated counterpart. For example, when the Guardians get offed, we see Red Rush's eyes popping out of his skull, Aquarius's Dolphin Boy innards spilling out, and War Woman puking blood down her cape. The camera takes its time and lingers on the visceral results of violence, which again, not kosher for YouTube. In contrast, in the comic, most of the Guardians are killed in single panels like these. The violence is abstracted by using block coloring, rendering it less visceral. So what effect does this have? It's probably a matter of opinion, but we'd argue that when you depict blood and gore as liberally and regularly as the show does, you run the risk of desensitization. Because it reliably appears in every fight scene, it can't have the same impact that it would if used less frequently. Almost like how the F-bombs come so frequently in a Tarantino movie that you need to gloss over them instead of counting them, so you know how many Hail Marys you need to do at confession. To see this at play, let's compare the climactic Omni-Man Invincible showdown with its source material, and even more specifically, specifically, that subway scene. Easily the most brutal thing in the entire show, and the thing that might have permanently turned me into a bus guy. It's a pretty memorable moment, and hard to watch, so you might be surprised to hear that it's not in the comics. So why take the violence to such an extreme place on the show? Our guess? They felt like they simply had to up the ante after a season chock full of blood and guts. But after a scene as harrowing as the subway scene, any subsequent violence will probably pale in comparison and thus become a little meaningless.
These people are meaningless. They're cavemen without us.
So while the show absolutely takes the consequences of super fights more seriously, it arguably ends up trivializing them. Because if everything is super violent, then nothing is super violent. Or something like that. Let's move on. And finally, difference number 3. The show treats the general superheroics with way more weight than the comics. Just like the show takes the consequences of violence more seriously, it also takes the fights themselves more seriously too. As a result, the show and the comic occupy different places within the wider superhero genre. Take the previously mentioned Flaxen invasion. The major beats are more or less the same. The Flaxens unsuccessfully invade Earth, are defeated, and return to invade again a while later. But the difference is in how we're led to perceive each version of the invasion are important. See, the show takes the view that a swarm of tooled up interdimensional invaders is a big deal, which it is. If Obama taught us anything, it's that aliens are real and should be treated with respect and reverence. Civilians either flee or get obliterated, and there's a ton of collateral damage. The heroes narrowly escape death at various points of both invasions. During these moments, the score is all sweeping, grave, and dramatic, indicating that we should take these moments super seriously, like Christopher Nolan's soundtrack seriously. The comic, on the other hand, frames things quite differently. First of all, the Flaxen invasions aren't portrayed as that big of a deal. The first is treated as a momentary distraction, while the second serves as an opening gag, complete with a punchline about the Flaxen's clever but useless wristbands. In both instances, the comic actively subverts the expected seriousness of an alien invasion, to the point where it seems like just part of the routine, which, if Obama and that guy from Blink-182 are right, will soon be our reality. And it's this theme, the super heroic as the mundane, that defines the comics' versions of events. They spend less time on epic super battles and more time showing Invincible at school or chatting with his mom. It's only when superheroing gets personal, like the subplot with the Rearrangement or the Omni-Man reveal, that the comic chooses to focus on it and take it seriously. The rest of the time, it revels in the larger-than-life surreality of it all. It knows how absurd superhero fiction is, but it doesn't poke fun. This places the comic firmly in the realm of parody, where the intention isn't to ridicule, but rather to use the genre to comment on something else entirely. The show, on the other hand, doesn't engage in any of the parodic behaviors of the comic. Anytime a super fight happens, it is a big deal, with real big ramifications. While we do get some mundane moments of Mark with his mom or best friend, the show aims to sell them as deeply emotional scenes. While there is some juxtaposition between the super heroic and the mundane, it's more in the traditional mold of superhero fiction, a variant on the Peter Parker Spider-Man dynamic. All of this means that the show and comic occupy different places in the broader superhero genre, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they were made 15 years apart. See, when Invincible the comic first came out, it was the very tail end of the dark age of comics. This is when everything trended grim and gritty, and the industry was preoccupied with questioning what comics should even be. Invincible rebelled against that trend, and served as one of the standard bearers for a new, less insecure age of comics. In contrast, film and television never had to go through a dark age of superhero audiovisual entertainment. It learned its lessons from the comics. So Invincible the show didn't need to rebel the same way the comics did. But that doesn't make what it's doing any less brave. It chose to take its characters, their actions, and the consequences seriously. In the process, it makes the compelling case for superhero fiction as fulfilling character drama with genuine emotional stakes. Not the same winking and nudging of the comics we loved, but a satisfying viewing experience in its own right. But what do you guys think? Would the show have benefited from more parody, or was the comics' more restrained use of gore better for the story? Let us know in the comments. Smash that subscribe button like it's Invincible's face, and you're a big old subway train, and be sure to ring that bell. Shout out to our patrons for all your support, and as always, thanks for watching. Later.